Hey folks, so in this video I wanted to do some technical analysis, but before that I just wanted to talk about one little news piece right here. So this is coming from Reuters, and I'm just following up on last week's news when I talked about crude oil. So it says right here, all European Union governments complete approval of Russian oil price cap. So on Saturday, we had this OPEC Plus meeting, and they pretty much agreed with the $60 per barrel price cap on Russian seaborne oil. So there is one more thing to this, and the situation is that on Monday, the European Union is not going to be buying any Russian seaborne crude. And also on February 5th, they're going to stop imports of Russian petroleum products. So now we're kind of just waiting on how Russia is going to respond to this. So they did say prior that any country that agreed to this price cap, they won't be selling them any oil. So we'll see if they stay true to that. But this story is definitely going to develop. And I believe that this week is primarily going to be dominated with headlines surrounding oil. So definitely do pay attention to that. Now, one more thing that I do want to talk about is the week following this week is going to be a very, very big week. We're going to have CPI, and bigger than that, we're going to have the Fed economic projections. So that is when we are going to see some big, big moves, in my opinion, in the market. So now I'm going to talk about just where we're sitting right now. So a long time ago, I made this thing, I called it the correction calculator. And right here, I'm just looking at the SPY, the Qs, and the Dow. So if we're looking at the SPY, the 52-week high was right around 479.98. We're currently at 406.91. So we're 15.22% from the high. So we're in correction territory right now. For the Qs, the 52-week high is 404.58. Current value is 292.55. We are at 27.69% from the top. So we're in crash status. Now, what about the DIA, which is following the Dow? We are at 344.76. The 52-week high was 369.50. We're only 6.7% from the top. So the interesting thing here is that in 2020, the situation was totally flipped. The Dow was seriously underperforming. The Qs were overperforming. So, now we're seeing the situation flip back over here, where the Dow is very strongly overperforming and the Qs are underperforming. And of course, the SPY, it's always somewhere in between. So now let's go ahead. Let's take a look at the technicals. So I'm going to be taking a look at Apple, Microsoft, SPY, and the VIX. So the big guys. Now let's just talk about this chart a little bit. Right here we're looking at Apple. So right here we have this trend line. It goes all the way back to 2019. Right here was the last touch point. So you guys can see, it's acting as support. We also have this resistance. This is happening right around August of 2022. So we've just been rejecting off this line this whole entire time. So this pattern right here, this is a pennant, and that's kind of where we're at right now. We're just kind of squiggling back and forth between this, between these two trend lines. So this right here is a pennant. Now we're also kind of sandwiched right in between the 50-day moving average and the 200-day moving average. So let me just go ahead and zoom in for you guys so you guys can see that. So right now the 50-day moving average is right at 145.75. The 200-day moving average is right at 154. Let's see, 154.97. So let's just zoom out again. Oops, zoomed out a little bit too much. So let's talk about these green blocks and these red blocks. So this green block right here, this is a demand zone. So every single time we seem to get down into this area, we start picking up big time. So this demand zone, it's right around 128.84 is the bottom and 137.68 is the top right here. So you guys can see, we dipped down here a few times. We got picked up very quickly. Back here, you know, we dipped down here. It was really only for a few days, and then we just skyrocketed. And this was a huge, huge rally. This ended up, unfortunately, being a massive, massive bull trap. So what is this red area right here? So this red area, if we're looking at different points in time, it could be something different. So back here, you know, this was a supply zone because as we got here, you know, we just sold right off. And then we got back up here again, but we seriously took off and we just skyrocketed to the moon. And then when we came back here, you know, this was acting as support. And when we got back in here, you know, support again. So this area was a demand zone if we're looking from this time frame to this time frame. Now look right here, you know, we skyrocket again. We have this massive sell-off. And then we're finding support at the top of this old demand zone. But then once we just knife through this, this becomes a supply zone. You can see once we get into supply zone, we sell off again. Huge sell-off. Massive rally. And then, you know, this is still a supply zone at this point in time. But here, you know, we're just seeing a massive squeeze because we got above the supply zone. So now we're seeing this huge, huge squeeze. We create this gap right there. And then, you know, the shorts are just getting the living daylight squeezed out of them. And then, you know, we reject. We enter this old supply zone back here. We reject, seriously reject. And then we get right back into the supply zone. We chop around a little bit, sell off. We rally again. We enter the supply zone once again. And then, you know, the supply zone is lined up with the 200-day moving average at this point. We reject again. You know, we enter the demand zone. We bounce back into the supply zone. We sell off again. And here we are stuck in this pennant. So, you know, it's reasonable to say that if we do break out, you know, either we're going to seriously just break right out of this supply zone and just make these massive highs again, or we're going to break out and get right back into the supply zone, maybe chop around. And, you know, I'm not saying that with 100% certainty. Do keep in mind that this 200-day moving average is creeping into the supply zone, so it's right in the middle of the supply zone. So, you know, it's entirely possible that we could just rally. Maybe we chop around here for a little bit. So definitely do pay attention to this zone. So this zone is going to be right around 150.06 to 157.44. Now, if we do get above this supply zone and we manage to hold this 157.44, then I do believe that Apple would look pretty darn bullish. But, you know, always, always, always keep in mind what is going on with the macro situation. Now, let's go ahead. Let's look at Microsoft. Let's just zoom out a little bit more. All right, so first thing I want to talk about is this trend line right here. So this trend line is pretty much just connecting these tops. Now, I see this movement right here as a false breakout. So this is pretty much just bull bait. So bulls literally got baited here. You know, they saw this breakout, they're like, oh, yay, and then they got trapped right there. So this did a very clean rejection off the 200-day moving average. So this looks pretty darn bearish when that does happen. And then we get back to this trend line, and then you can see that even a gap was formed right here. So there's a gap that got formed right there, and a massive, massive sell-off, cut right below the 50-day moving average. And then here we go, you know, we bounce right back. We got back to this, didn't even make it to the 50-day moving average at this point in time, and then just sold off again. So this red area, you know, this red block right here, this is a supply zone. So you guys can see that because you can see this chopping price action. We shortly got above this supply zone right there, and then you can see this price action consolidate. And then we sold right back into the supply zone, and then we had this massive gap down when we broke out of the supply zone. And then you can see right here, you know, we get back in the supply zone, we chop around, you know, you see some distribution going on, and then you see this massive sell-off once we get out of the supply zone again. Here we go, one more time. You know, we get in the supply zone, we sell off yet again. And then right here, you know, this is when we just have that one decisive crazy breakout. This is when everybody in pretty much every single stock got squeezed out, all the shorts. You know, then we hit that 200-day moving average, strong, strong sell-off. And then here we go, we sell right out of the supply zone. We get right back in it, sell off again. And then that's usually how things are. When you sell off this much, you don't just go straight down. You tend to go right back up. You enter the supply zone again just to trick the bulls again. And then whoop, massive sell off. And then here we go into this demand zone. So this demand zone is right around 226 to around 238. So we did peak a little bit out of that. And then there is another demand zone all the way down here. So what makes this a demand zone? Well, go all the way back to this price action. You can see this consolidation and this massive breakout. And then you can see this right here too. This consolidation for a long, long time. Massive breakout. So these right here are demand zones. So for a very short time, we got into this demand zone. We shortly broke below it. And then you can see that we got picked up very quickly from this demand zone right here. Now, where are we right now? Well, we just got out of this yellow zone right here. So, this yellow zone was also a demand zone. You can see this sideways consolidation and this massive rip. So we recently just got out of this area right here. And then take a look. We are right along this resistance trend line right there. So this begs the question, what's going to happen? I mean, are we just going to chop around sideways below this trend line and above this yellow zone right here? So are we just going to trend out, build a flag, and then what happens then? Do we break out or do we break right back in to this yellow zone right here? So right now, this chart does look pretty good because we are above the 50-day moving average. So let's just zoom in a little bit to see what these moving averages are. All right. So the 50-day moving average, this is right here at 237.87. 200-day moving average, which also happens to be in the supply zone, is 265.18. This supply zone right here is 260 to 267.58 basically. Also do pay attention, if we do get above this supply zone, it's very possible that we could fill this gap right here. So this gap is pretty much right around, let's see, 285.50-ish would fill this gap right here. So this gap has never been filled, and it's a pretty big one right there, as you guys can see. So let's just go ahead, let's move over to SPY now. So SPY, my chart's a little bit complicated, but I'll explain it. I always like going a little bit more in depth on SPY. So let me just zoom out just a wee bit more. So same concept, green, this is the demand zone. We very briefly entered this demand zone, we chopped around a little bit, and then we ever so slightly peaked below it, and that's when we hit that bottom, and then we had this massive rally. So this demand zone is pretty much right around 350, let's see, 355 to 371.50. And then this yellow zone that we're at is pretty much 371.50 to 389-ish. So you guys can see that we're holding this 389 area. So let me just zoom in for that so you guys can see a little bit. So as you guys can see, we were holding this 389 area. So this was right at the top of this yellow zone. So we're holding that, and then we're having this big rally. So right now we're kind of in this chop zone. So this white area between this yellow and the red, this is the massive chop zone. So this resistance starts showing up at 416.35 is the beginning of this supply zone, and the top of this supply zone is 428.61. But we also do have this big resistance right here, right around 410.85. You guys can see we rejected pretty hard here last time we got there. You guys can also see right here, we did do some sideways consolidation before we sold off big time. You guys can also see, furthermore, this is the support that we built this massive green candle off of. So let's just zoom out a little bit more. And let's just take a look at the supply zone. So this supply zone actually used to be a demand zone. So you guys can see that right here. So we sold off, we got picked up right at the top of the supply zone. And then you guys can see we sold off again. We got picked up in the middle of the demand zone. And then here we go, we sell off one more time. We break below the demand zone, but then on the same day, we rally hard above it. And then we close pretty much at the top of the demand zone. And then here we go right back into the demand zone. And then we break out again. And then here we go, we sell off again. We chop around in this demand zone. And then we sell off. And at this point in time, it becomes a supply zone. So here we go. We rally one more time. We ever so slightly enter the supply zone again. And then we sell off big time. And then here we go. One more time. We break out. We enter the supply zone. We ever so slightly break above it. We hit the top of this resistance trend line. And then we sell off big time again. So this is a huge, huge supply zone. There's a lot of trap supply. And once again, this area is 416.35 to 428.61. So definitely be cautious around here. It's very possible, right now we're pretty much at the resistance line. So it's very possible that we could break out. We break out of this 410.85 level and we enter this supply zone and we possibly make something that looks like a double top. That is a very possible scenario. Now what happens? Do we get above the supply zone, or do we enter the supply zone, everybody sells off, and then we have another massive sell-off again? That's entirely possible. Just keep in mind right now, we've had a pretty good run here on pretty crappy macros. So like I said, we could have a really bad interest rate forecast for this economic projections, or we could have a bad set of earnings come January. So there's a lot of situations that could cause us to sell off. And right now, I personally feel like we're a little bit euphoric right now. And we are above the 200-day moving average. We are above the 50-day. So the 50-day on the SPY is 380.33. The 200-day on the SPY is 403.74. Now, let's go ahead. Let's look at the last thing, the VIX. Now, here's the VIX. Let me just zoom out a little bit so you guys can see it. So we are pretty much in this falling wedge pattern. It looks like a pair of chopsticks. Now let's just go ahead. Let's zoom in a little bit more. Zoom in right there. Alrighty. So as you guys can see, we're just bouncing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now a lot of people, they always say, hey, you know what? When the VIX gets below 20, this is when you want to start selling some things. And you want to take a few things off the table. Maybe you want to get a few hedges, this and that. So here is the demand zone on the VIX. So this demand zone on the VIX comes in right around 15 to 1861. So you guys can see right around this area, we always see some consolidation and expansion. So right here we see consolidation, expansion, consolidation, expansion, and this pattern just goes on for a while. So right now we're about to enter the top of the demand zone. Are we just going to bounce off right from there, or are we going to fall deeper in here? If we do start falling deeper into the demand zone, that's probably likely going to mean that the SPY starts getting a little bit overbought. Now think about this. Do you think the SPY is really worth over 400 with these macro conditions? Pretty much everybody right now is calling for a recession. And we're pretty much set to have a good quarter for Q3, but hey, I mean, we don't really know what's going to go on in Q4 or Q1 of 2023. So this recession, it could definitely happen, and a lot of people are predicting that recession does happen. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, the interest rates are going to be higher in December, so the situation is not really going to get any better. And it's very likely that inflation could come down a little bit, but if inflation is coming down, a lot of people say it's going to be for the wrong reasons. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and have a great one.